No, no, yes, still we have our license now. Thank you so much.
Somos los buenos estudiantes hoy.
Somos los únicos.
Pero no eres
Aquí,
no he ido por la casa, si las explicaban ahora. Por ahora no hay video.
les van a dar las credenciales. Sí, sí, les van a dar las credenciales hasta les van a limitar todo, solo les van a dejar venir a las universidades. Hasta ahí no hay nada, pues o sea, les van a limitar todo, pero nada, en abril se exige. Y sin abril, si no tal, todo parece que se enfadará. En abril, en abril. Bueno, en la reunión de ayer de la reunión creo que creo que empezamos diciendo, eran ellas, creo que empezamos diciendo, buenos días, venimos aquí a presentarse, pero que estas son las cosas que vamos a decir, pero que sepan que no vamos a decir y que no vamos a disfrutar según quitaba el inicio. Entonces, ¿sabes qué decía? Yo no quiero, yo haría un poco así.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon. The sitting is open. I remind members that they should insert their badge before taking the floor. As you begin your speech, please press the microphone button once only. Our next business is to consider a change proposed in the membership of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. This is set out in Document Commissions 2025-01 Addendum 3. Is the proposed change in the membership of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination agreed to? I see it is agreed. The next item of business this afternoon is the debate on the report titled Multiperspectivity in Remembrance and History Education for Democratic Citizenship, document 16019, presented by Ms. Luz Martinez Seijo on behalf of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media. In order to finish by 12 p.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 11:45 to allow time for the reply and the vote. So I call Ms. Luz Martinez Seijo, the rapporteur. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. Please, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Presidenta. Tengo el honor de...
Thank you very much. I have the honor to present this report on a particularly important date, the day that we're going to celebrate the anniversary of the Holocaust. Memory of this is very, very important in view of what we're going to discuss today. In other words, the multiperspectivity in remembrance and history education for democratic citizenship, particularly in an environment of polarization. So what we're dealing with are the challenges, educational and social in nature, promoting democratic values, critical thinking, and respect for diversity. What we point out here is that the teaching of history isn't only about conveying facts, but helping students to analyze in a critical fashion the past, understand the present, and construct a more inclusive future. Looking at the ability to differentiate between facts and propaganda and developing critical thinking. This particular report emphasizes that for democratic citizenry, it's absolutely important to have from the beginning to the end of education this particular component. The teaching of history has to be of a participatory nature, and of course, students play a very important role in this particular process. The reference framework for competences for democratic, cultural, national curriculums provides for numerous different approaches on this front for participatory education and important for the development of participatory societies. Critical thinking, cultural sensitivity, understanding of diversity, very important. But implementation of education for democratic citizenry involves flexible curricula which will bring together the numerous different aspects of newfangled education, which will help to facilitate students to look at things in a critical fashion. Also, sensitive issues have to be incorporated. For example, genocide, totalitarianism, to foment an understanding about the problems there entailed, and also to develop tolerance. What's underlined here is it's important to show to students to understand numerous different perspectives and approaches. It also establishes the difference between memory and history, collective and individual, trying to find ways to interpret through analysis of a critical nature and evidence. Of course, all approaches are noble, remembering and history, but we have to incorporate this effectively in the classroom. Reconciliation, democratic values have to be fomented. we have to reflect on injustices of the past and prevent the repetition of atrocities in the future. A focus of a participatory nature using memory, questioning, analyzing, reconstructing historical moments along with students. This is important. The memory of the Holocaust is a wonderful example here, how we bring all of this information together, and this in order to bolster human rights and to bolster social cohesions. This offers also victims the ability to participate in the process through dialogue. It looks at the possibility of avoiding distortion as well, and of course excluding, also closely being very, very careful about incorporating alternative narratives, which may be a way to compensate or to provide for those who don't find the historical truth comfortable. This has to be carefully looked at. We need a careful understanding of the new practices out there, and that would involve visits to museums, for example, the memorial in Sibir, the Museum of Children in War in Bosnia, all of this in order, once again, to foment reconciliation. We also need programs which involve or incorporate European cultural routes of history, developing a sense of memory, solidarity, and an understanding that solidarity is important to overcome the problems that exist in the world today. These initiatives show us that the non-formal experience can complement formal educational techniques and introduce participatory and interactive methods as well. This has been done in the case of the study of history. Since 1975, a very difficult period of great uncertainty in Spain following the death of Franco, the necessity existed to provide education about education, how to integrate historical memory into education as well, particularly with the Franco period and the civil war behind us. It was very important to find new educational pathways that would provide for a democratic education. Promoting civil education as well, and introducing new courses in history. Navarra is a wonderful example of this. At the regional level, the Instituto Navarro of Memory foments peace and cooperation with schools of memory, which have conducted a number of different research activities on history and promoted reconciliation. Also, a network of places which look at the issue of repression, exile, suffering, linking children to history, to that difficult period. And finally, the report looks on a multi-perspective approach to teaching history, which would allow for students to explore, analyze critically the historical events of the past. This involves inclusivity, critical thinking, understanding, more adjusted to the needs of historical education. This is fundamental in order to strengthen democratic values and to deal with authoritarian tendencies and to foment social cohesion as well. Thank you.
Our debate, and in the debate I call first the representatives of the political groups. And the first one is the list is Ms. Sevilay Çelenk-Özen from the United European Left. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, first, let me express my sincere appreciation to the rapporteur. This is an excellent contribution to understanding how we can approach history and memory in a way that fosters democratic values and democratic citizenship. As we discuss this report today, I am reminded of the words of French historian Fernand Braudel. He tells us that the past, like the present, is no more than an interpretation of the facts. This insight challenges us to reflect critically on how we narrate history. It also highlights a responsibility who gets to interpret. Who gets to tell the story? Is it those in positions of power, or is it the citizens themselves? Brodel also reminds us that history doesn't progress only through great events, but also through the everyday lives of ordinary people. This, I believe, is the foundation of a democratic approach to history education. When we focus solely on leaders, treaties, and wars, we risk losing sight of the lives, struggles, and resilience of ordinary people who shape and are shaped by history. Today, as Europe is surrounded by conflicts and wars, from Gaza and Syria to Ukraine, this report's emphasis on democratic citizenship through multiperspectivity couldn't be more urgent. These conflicts are not only geopolitical crises, they are also crises of memory and narratives. They remind us that remembrance is not neutral. It is a political act, a choice. What we choose to remember and what we choose to forget shapes our collective identity and our future. This approach is particularly urgent in a time when divisive narratives and memory conflicts fuel tensions. By promoting multiperspectivity in schools, we foster peace, reconciliation, and democratic citizenship. History education becomes not just a lesson about the past, but a foundation for a shared, inclusive future. Let us ensure remembrance serves as a tool for understanding and unity, not division. Together, we can construct a more democratic and peaceful Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Çelenk Özen. The next speaker is Gökçe Gökçen, Ms. Gökçe Gökçen from Socialists. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, political debates taking place in Europe today are not independent of the suffering experienced in the past, nor of the fear that such tragedies may be repeated. The crisis that Europe and its institutions are facing today, the European responses, the rise of far-right movements, and the stances taken by young people in the face of these crises are often discussed from various perspectives: law, human rights, hate speech, politics. However, we place our trust in democracy and how open discussion contributes to it. We can build democratic citizenship not only by looking anxiously from today to tomorrow, but by looking from today to the past with self-confidence and with a mindset that is not afraid of debate. Bringing memory back, realizing what we have forgotten, and seeing how children and young people can improve democracy when they have access to real knowledge. These are, of course, related to history education. Dear colleagues, the qualities Europe represents, tolerance, pluralism, peace, security, were not gifted to Europe in a single day. World wars, conflicts, totalitarian regimes, racism, xenophobia, and violence. These were the reminders of Europe not so long ago. Yet it is also a fact that history, when told as the history of wars, nations, and states, often fails to fully convey the costs borne by people. People lived through real human stories, made great sacrifices, suffered so much, and societies which made the best analysis of the suffering they faced. They engaged in difficult conversations, and that found the truth with confidence are the ones that met democracy. And democracy should not be taken for granted. It is a game that is hard to win and easy to lose. For this reason, the guiding principles for history education and the reference framework should serve as key principles. States should update their history education, both in terms of curriculum and methodology, ensuring it reflects multiple perspectives. Cooperation should be established between formal education and non-formal education, including the contribution of remembrance sites and museums. History education is a tool that can help turn a new page to understand where we are and what we are. For these reasons, we fully support the report and thank Ms. Luz Martinez for this well-thought work. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Gökçen. And the next speaker is Yonut Marian Stroe from the European People's Party. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, as we see worrying trends of democratic backsliding and societal polarization across Europe, it is critical to reaffirm education's fundamental role in protecting our shared values. The EPP Group welcomes this timely contribution on multiperspectivity in memory and history education for democratic citizenship, and we fully support the central message on this report. In an era of misinformation and historical revisionism, young people must develop critical thinking skills in order to analyze historical sources, understand the different interpretation of the past, and distinguish between facts and propaganda. This is not about relativizing history truths, but rather about fostering a nuanced understanding of complex events and preventing the manipulation of history for political purposes. In doing so, this only strengthens young people's ability to detect distortions in propaganda, a crucial skill in today's information landscape. We believe that a strong emphasis on civic education rooted in our shared European values is essential for building resilient and inclusive societies. This includes introducing education for democratic citizenship as a distinct, compulsory subject and incorporating related competencies and topics into other relevant subjects, such as history teaching, throughout all the stages of formal education. History education should not become a tool for division, but rather a bridge for dialogue and mutual understanding. The emphasis on human rights and democratic is vital, as is the focus on studying different forms of totalitarian regimes which have devastated Europe in the 20th and 21st centuries. Partnerships between schools, cultural institutions, remembrance sites, museums, and civil societies organizations can provide invaluable learning opportunities for students. These safe learning spaces for democracy, as the report refers to them, provide opportunities for interactive learning, intergenerational dialogue, and a deeper understanding of history. We at the EPP believe that member states need to actively promote and support these partnerships together with solutions for adequate funding and resources. The EPP Group is committed to promoting quality education for all European citizens. We urge all the member states to take these recommendations seriously and to work together to ensure that future generations are equipped with skills, critical thinking, and values necessary to uphold, promote, and defend our shared democratic heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stroe. Our next speaker is Marcus Viegel from the European Conservatives. Please.
Thank you, Madam President. To my mind, there are two fundamental elements in our lives. There's time, which forms our history as communities and societies, and there's physical space, underlying geography forming as it does the stage, as it were, where events or history is constantly being played out. This is why history, like geography, were considered such important school subjects for an earlier generation, especially after two devastating world wars. The thought was that even though we cannot look into the future, we can learn from the past and thereby enable us to do our utmost to steer our civilization towards outcomes likely to preserve peace and more stable and humane international order. Our ceremony in about an hour in memory of the liberation of Auschwitz in 1945 is the kind of event we must bear in remembrance forever, so that the Holocaust or anything similar, any similar tragedy, must never, ever be allowed to happen again. More generally, the first word in the title of our debate, the near-tongue twister, multiperspectivity, means that we must hear and respect different opinions as regards to historical events. This is indeed what we have in this assembly ever since our founding in 1949. This is the essence of the Council of Europe and ours and of our very democracy. In conclusion, I wish to congratulate the rapporteur and the committee on a good report. I sincerely hope that our vital debate and report on this importance of history in education will find its due echo in our schools, our universities, and in public life. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Viechel. And the next speaker is Yulia Ovchinnikova from ALDE. Please.
Dear Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the ALDE Group, I would like to thank the committee and Madam Rapporteur for this extremely important and urgently needed report. So this report deals with the very core of the Council of Europe and the democracy, need for remember our past, learning from history and educated people how to be true citizens of democratic nations. These are the key ingredients of Europe as a project of peace. Peace that comes with and from knowledge, values and actions to protect our world from wars. This is why we're here, ladies and gentlemen. So this is why the Council of Europe, United Nations, and finally, European Union were established. And now we have been witness how Russia is trying to undermine the whole world by brutal falsification and fabrication of the whole history from before and after the Second World War. And it's not just about Ukraine or Georgia, Moldova or Belarus, Slovakia or Hungary, Germany or France. A well-designed history education is essential for gaining a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the past. It equips us to evaluate the present critically, differentiating between facts, memories, interpretations, and perspectives. History education should be a key part of human rights education and foundation for young people to develop democratic citizenship. So, education system must adapt to social changes and respond with new curricula and interactive methodologies. So they must counter the erosion of democratic values, particularly among young people in Europe. So, for this reason, education for a democratic citizenship should be a distinct compulsory subject, included the other relevant subjects, such as history teaching, during all stages of formal education and form to continue part of the vocational training and non-formal education. So we must include competencies for democratic culture in teacher education and vocational training, multiply teachers' opportunities for professional exchange and development. So in an era when the historical narrative are increasing, manipulated to justify aggression, most notably in context of the ongoing war in Europe, the role of critical history is very, very important. So let us embrace this mission with dedication and commitment, ensuring that history education remains a pillar of our democratic society. Let us unite in building a future where no aggression goes unanswered, no crimes goes unpunished, and no nation stands alone in its fight for sovereignty and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ovchinnikova. In the debate, I call next Lord George Fuchs. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I too congratulate Luth on an excellent report on this important issue. History is an incredibly powerful tool, and in the right hands it can be used to foster democratic citizenship and build mutual understanding. But in the wrong hands it can be misused to undermine diversity, erode democracy, and increase polarization. But interpretation is the key, and as the old saying goes, there are two sides to every story. Hiding the wide range of viewpoints which exist by only teaching history from one perspective is dangerous and a disservice to future generations, because it's by critically engaging with the past that young people can develop the necessary skills to navigate contemporary challenges and recognize fact from fiction, so important in this age of social media. If I can take an example from British history, the relationship between Scotland and England, centuries of conflict, including the wars of independence and tensions following the union of the crowns, created a legacy of animosity between the Scots and the English. But now both nations have managed to create a balanced history curriculum that explores the Scottish and the English perspective, helping to break down stereotypes and foster mutual respect. Teaching the Act of Union of 1707 alongside moments of division like the Jacobite risings highlight the complexity of unity and division. While the English have Flodden, we have Bannockburn. And while they may claim that Scotland was subsumed into the Union, we can remind them that it was our King James VI of Scotland that became their King James I of England. Ultimately, the recognition of the great Scottish contributions to British history and the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and the ongoing healthy debates around devolution show how multiple perspectives can create and combine the narratives which unite us. So in conclusion, by teaching history responsibly and inclusively, we strengthen democracy and create resilient, informed citizens. So we must ensure that young people across Europe and beyond, particularly now in the United States, learn to engage critically with the past, embrace diversity, and uphold the principles of pluralism and democracy. Because with recent surveys sadly indicating that Generation Z Brits are increasingly supportive of the idea of authoritarian rule, we need history education to remind them that democracy was hard won and should never be taken for granted.
Thank you. The next speaker is Madame Marianne Binder-Keller. Please, Madame, the floor is yours.
Verehrte Frau Rapporteurin, ich danke für diesen
Rapporteur, thank you very much for this report, and I, of course, support you wholeheartedly. Never again is something that my parents haven't experienced the war and the killing of prisoners, genocide against Jews, the 6 million Jewish women, children, and men that sank into collective conscience. And as I get older and I look through, for example, the minutes of the trials at Nuremberg, I understand all the more so the tragedy and the horror of all of this. Young professors, young children, all persecuted by a mob, and Jewish students chased through the streets. Of course, we don't have to go through a further list of the horrors that took place then, but not even 80 years after the Holocaust, the problem still persisted. 30 years, Europe was separated by a wall. On the one hand, democracy and the West. On the other hand, the Soviet dictatorship with its state of elites. We in the West, those of course who tried to flee to the West over the Berlin Wall, were shot. And then 30 years later, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, where there's freedom in our Europe here, people are fleeing to us from totalitarian systems like that of Putin, or fleeing from war, from the Ukraine, for example. And the Stalinist terror of Holodomor in Ukraine, that has not yet been forgotten either. So I sit with people that want peace in Europe, and we call out against the aggressor. We label invasions as they are, like that which has taken place in Ukraine, but we have no peace. We know what Chamberlain, with his appeasement policy, what that led to, and we have to avoid that at all costs. Looking at education now, social media, the dissemination of false information, propaganda, all of this is reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984. The individual is being lost, freedom is sacrificed, and it's education, the education that we have right now, it is education which will save us from this loss of freedom. Thank you.
Keller, and the next on the list is Sir Edward Lee. The floor is yours, please.
Madam President, the teaching of history is indeed essential for the future of Europe, and I agree with Lord Fuchs that there is a multiplicity of narratives and modes of interpretation. The essential purpose of history must remain the search for truth, being able to relay, based on evidence and intellect, what actually happened at a given time and place and what the effect has been. Truth must always be the most important thing, but there's great value in examining a multiplicity of perspectives in order to arrive at the truth. Now, this resolution rightly points out that including sensitive and sometimes controversial parts of history and considering multiple perspectives when analysing sources can reinforce democratic culture. That's correct. It's clear that we need to foster greater respect for differences of opinion. But for too long, comfortable political elites across Europe have operated as an intellectual closed shop. Anything from outside a cosy, liberal, manufactured consensus is viewed with at best disdain, but often outright contempt. This has undermined the operation of our national and European institutions. It has undermined our democratic culture. It explains why the voters of the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union. It helps to understand why there's been such an upsurge of populism, not just here in Europe, but around the world, as a recent election in the United States has shown. At the same time, anyone who supports this multi-perspective approach can see the dangers of what this resolution calls for. Section 611 calls for the introduction of, I quote, education for democratic citizenship as a distinct and mandatory subject for all stages of formal education, end quote. This is exactly the kind of heavy, top-down approach which we should be seeking to avoid. And I fear that mandatory lessons in, I quote, democratic citizenship will in each country in which they are introduced merely reinforce existing liberal centre-left conformist narratives. This will undermine precisely the multi-perspectivity which this report and resolution seek to promote. In reality, the skills and approaches needed to fostering a democratic culture are the skills which are eternally useful. In the Middle Ages, the great centres of learning, Paris, Bologna, Oxford, were founded upon the 7 liberal arts, divided into the trivium and quadrivium. Grammar, the art and structure of language. Logic, the study of reason, of validity. And rhetoric, the art of speaking, discussing, and persuading. What these 3 sets of skills or competencies could be better suited to living and engaging as citizens of democratic societies. Instead, I suspect lessons in democratic citizenship will only force-feed more of the anti-intellectual and effectively substanceless diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion agenda. The DEI agenda is being comprehensively rejected by the voters in democratic mandates across Europe and the world, and we should reject it too.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker is Mr. Bertrand Bouix. Vous avez la parole, monsieur.
You have the floor, sir. Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, before I get down to brass tacks, I'd like to say why I'm fascinated by this subject and why I find it to be of such basic importance in the world we live in today and which we'll be living in tomorrow. For the very simple reason that we can no longer be allowed to live separated, each of us in our little space, opposed to our neighbors, but still having to face up to giants, whether they be geographic, economical, technological, and today military. There are many reasons that stop us from being more closely united. I won't mention all of them, but in any case, there is one that seems to me of really basic importance, which concerns the emotions of European peoples, which are often built by playing off some peoples against others. History has not yet been digested, and it is now paralyzing our outlook for the future today in 2025. Without going all the way back to the Battle of Bouvines and Jeanne d'Arc, 1848, 1870, 1919, 1945, 1989, are all dates which make us have strong feelings today. For some of us, catastrophe followed the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and for others, the Ottoman Empire stopped their countries from playing their role fully and taking advantage of opportunities that they're still paying for today. For some, it's the Soviet Union, and for some, it's both. So sometimes there are issues of territorial disputes. I'm not going to mention any specific regions so as not to turn the knife in any given wound, but I will mention one in my own country and in the place where we are right now, Alsace, which is a region that changed nationality 4 times between 1870 and 1945, a region which today is a link between France and Germany. Now, what has this reconciliation been based on? Not on forgetting, but rather on teaching history in the most shared possible way to French children and German children. And so you'll tell me that the reconciliation, which went back to the history book concerning France and Germany, is only about 20 years old. But we could today promote the ideal of a German-Polish history textbook, or a Romanian-Hungarian one, or a Greek-Turkish one, and at the end of the day, why not a European one, which will allow us to have shared emotions, allowing us to confront the challenges of the future, because that's what we're talking about. The report of our Spanish colleague, Ms. Martina Seijo, does not limit itself to educative issues, even if that's the nucleus of this. She gives all of her expertise coming from her country to do a huge amount of work reconciling Frankist and Republican memories when the dictator died, and to allow democracy to go forward as a unified nation. The report gives us many different interesting way forwards concerning places of memory, museums, European cultural itineraries. And this is a great issue. It's one of the ones that is not the most visible, but which is essential if we want to build a common future. I would also like to recall my own very modest contribution to this with the proposal that I made to create an order of European solidarities, which was supposed to give decorations to citizens who have stood out in this area. I will therefore vote for this report with enthusiasm, and I should also like to greet all the members of the Observatory of History Teaching in the Council of Europe, and in particular the person who leads it, Alain Massot. Thank you very much.
Merci. The next speaker is Madame Bisera Konstantinovska-Stoichevska. Please.
Thank you, Madam President. I would first like to congratulate the rapporteur for this utmost timely report. As we can see, that history has never been misused like today and in recent times. This balanced yet innovative approach that this detailed recommendation portrays puts teachers and students in the center and leaves history to tell its story and not politicians. We can all agree that education system must adapt to social changes and respond with new curricula, and they should contribute to countering the erosion of democratic values, particularly among young people in Europe. We also have to help students develop their critical thinking through learning how to evaluate historical sources and make well-informed judgments. We have to help them to develop human right-based analysis of historical events, multi-perspectivity in historical education, and critical consideration of different standpoints. We have to guarantee free access to virtual learning environments, and we have to help them facilitate partnership between schools, cultural institutions, and other relevant stakeholders, such as sites of remembrance, museums, archives, civil societies, and artists together. In the end, let me say that we have to let history be our teacher and not our prison. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Madame Elizaveta Jasko. Please, Madame, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, I'm sure that you've been wondering many times why we Ukrainians are so crazily brave. We want to talk so much about history, about our self-determination. I'm sure you were wondering that many times. And one of the answers is in our history, that in the past, in the centuries of the past, our historical memory was taken away from us. It was always an attempt from aggressor, from Russian Empire, from Soviet Union, to delete our memory about our family roots, about our history. And now we know what means never again. We know it better than anyone probably, because it happens to us in the present time as well. Almost each family knows that some of our family members were sent to Siberia, or were tortured, or were killed in prison, but we were actually never able to access the files of the archives because they were always taken by Soviet Union, by KGB, by so many who wanted to erase our memory. And luckily, in 2015, we opened our archives. And as someone who was working on some of these files, it was incredibly scary to see some of the folders of executions of Stalin times, of hundreds of names of people who were executed, sent to Siberia. This only serves of how many methods of evil were and are still existing to distort our memory, our history, and to distort our reality. Another example I want to raise here today is I'm sure that you listened to the Russian narrative many times that Donbass is Russian, that Donbass enterprises were Russian built. But in fact, if you look at the history, you will find that majority of industrial factories in Donbass were built by Europeans. People were speaking different languages. Donbass always had ethnic diversity. There were many, many people from different ethnic backgrounds. Greeks are one of them. That's why Mariupol is actually a Ukrainian-Greek city. Talking about all of this, I want to encourage you to invest in education of your children, that they remember, they study different pages of the history and the archives and the ability to look to that truth for the future is open to all of us. Please invest in the policies and all possible initiatives to fight propaganda and disinformation and fight for the truth of the history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jasko. The next speaker is Mr. Andreas Grifroy. Please.
I have to thank our rapporteur, Mrs. Luz Martinez-Sejo, for this wonderful report. Because what I have heard already from the previous speakers is that, in fact, every country, every nation has a history. And we are talking about Ukraine, and we are talking about the commemoration of the Holocaust. And I can also tell you what we have, for example, in Flanders. We have Flanders Fields, which is very known by the British people, the poppies. This is about the First World War, where we have cemeteries of the Germans and the British and the Canadian side by side, where we have a huge site of memory with a big sign, "No more war again." And 22 years later, we had war again. But for some of us, it's still difficult to talk about their past. They cannot talk about it openly. And that's where here comes that we have to say, okay, this history teaching should indeed not be limited by transmitting facts, but should help students critically analyze the past, understand also the present, and build by this a more inclusive future through a competence-based approach. And how we can do? But of course, this means that we have to integrate it in all levels of education. If we not talk about lower school or we talk about the university. And this means, depending from each country to each country, that maybe we have to reform curricula, but for sure, we have to look for reforms for teachers if needed. But second part is also, historical memory is not only through books. We need these musea. We need these memorial sites. We need these cultural roots where you look beyond your own borders. And so we have to connect this formal education by this non-formal education. And yes, for that reason, we have to protect our heritage. We have to conserve our heritage, because it's also a question of our identity. And we can do that by interactive methodology, but we can also do that by support for this non-formal education, how we call it, by ensuring funding. And I emphasize it here, the autonomy for museums and places of memory. So in fact, my conclusion, and thanks to the rapporteur, this report offers, in fact, a very good framework for how we can rethink the history teaching as a means of fostering our cultural diversity and preparing future generations to meet the democratic challenges of the 21st century. Thanks for the great report.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Attila Tilki.
Is it working? Yes. The Hungarian national curriculum, which was introduced in 2013, and it was amended in phasing a system from September 2020. It includes the key educational objectives like education for citizenship and democracy, the development of self-awareness and social culture, and more education as well. Each of these objectives particularly important for an accepting and open attitude towards others for a democratic coexistence in society. The national curriculum in 2020 breaks with the previous strictly chronological order of history teaching and in some cases follows the thematic principle. Thus it deals with topics that span entire historical period, such as democratic state, the roots of modern democracy. The textbook's authors also aspired for presenting different points of view on sensitive topics, therefore giving greater emphasis to multiperspectivity than in the previous textbook. History teaching must be a deliberated, patriotic, child-oriented, and 21st century curriculum that gave schools more freedom than its predecessors had. We must be able to hand our heritage onto future generations. If we have a clear idea of what we mean by family work, respect, love of homeland, then we are duty-bound to transmit that. That's what history education is about. There's not such thing as a neutral education. Educational systems are about values, about teaching what we think are the values of Hungarian society. And among the values we very much adore are those heroes who helped us survive the centuries behind us. The students must know who we really are to show that we are the Hungarians with 1,000 years of Christian statehood, monumental cultural achievements, 19 Nobel Prizes, 184 Olympic gold medals, and a beautiful capital city and beautiful countryside. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Sergio Gutierrez Prieto. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
President, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Madam Martina Seijo for a report which offers the broad range of possibilities in order to create that sense of reconciliation with the past and to collectively make ourselves stronger for the future. Who could be against learning and understanding our past? Who could be against knowing what happened, as Saramago has spoken about, the collective knowledge, that the collective knowledge of peoples is absolutely important. And without that, or trying to hide that so that we don't learn the lessons that have to be learned, that this is something shameful. So learning history is not simply learning the facts of history of the past. It allows us to understand who we are, learn from our mistakes, and consolidate, the most important of all, our fundamental values with which we develop a sense of citizenship and citizenry. It helps us to develop a sense of compassion as well, of understanding others. and exercising one's rights in different fashion and understanding those individuals as well. Coming to terms with our past, with our memory as well. This is one of the major problems, one of the major challenges, one of the major issues that, of course, is absolutely key to consolidate our democracies. So it's important for schools, for in school, to learn democratic memory, to teach democratic memory for three reasons. First of all, because understanding the past bolsters our liberty, our collective identity as well is made more robust. A society that forgets its past, really undermines the possibility of paving a proper future as well. Education, in order to bolster people, to make them stronger against manipulation, to develop a sense of critical thinking as well of a collective nature, and above all, and fundamentally, it's an issue of justice. Serving justice and paying honor to those and homage to those who have fought for democracy and freedom in the past as well. As Borges said, what is forgotten will be undoubtedly repeated. And what the rapporteur underlines here in this report is that it's absolutely key to remember our past, to know our past, in order to not repeat the errors and mistakes of the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker on the list is Ms. Denitsa Sacheva. Please, Madam, the floor is yours.
Ms. President, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I cannot but commend the work done by the rapporteur, Ms. Luz Martinez-Seijo, which is bringing back to our attention the issue of democratic citizenship and education. Let me first remind that the Declaration and the Programme on Education for Democratic Citizenship, based on the rights and responsibilities of citizens, was adopted by the Committee of Ministers in 1999 in Budapest, in occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Council of Europe. It was initiated by Mr. Svetlozar Raev, the first Bulgarian ambassador to the Council of Europe back in 1992, who fought 7 years to approach the member state to support its adoption. Here, I would like to pay tribute to then French Ambassador Jacques Varenne, who managed to work out a consensus between all then 41 member states of the Council of Europe and to negotiate an agreement between them. Now we are returning back to this debate, and I would like to point out one important element which is missing, and this is education for peace. Education systems have the great responsibility to build in the future generations the knowledge to understand the world, to foster culture of cooperation, to close digital and information divide. Peace education should be and must be part of the formal education through the national policies of school curriculums in history and civil education. As it comes to multiperspectivity, here I am very reluctant. I could provide you with many examples from the Balkan states where the history is deviated in such a way that it may cause conflicts instead of mutual understanding. It is not a multiperspectivity to create wrong imaginations, fantasies and fictions, which would fuel the conflicts among the neighbors. It is better to create an independent body for verification of the historic facts rather than to support creation of moondreams. Of course, the facts could be interpreted differently, but it has not been recommendable to falsify them. Encouragement of multiperspectivity in teaching the history at current stage would not be supportive, and we should think twice before to endorse it to member states. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sacheva. Now I ask Ms. Sona Ghazarian to take the floor. Please, Madam.
Madam President, thank you. Dear Luz, thank you for your very timely and important report. I would like to thank the organizers of 4th Annual Conference of Observatory on History Teaching in Europe and reaffirm Armenia's strong support for the observatory mission. Europe and broader world are navigating turbulent times, facing challenges that echo darker periods in history. The international order and multilateral institutions established after the Second World War to promote peace and stability are now under serious strain, as war has returned to Europe and beyond, eroding the foundations of security and cooperation. We are witnessing a troubling normalization of force, backsliding of democratic institutions, and a surge of populism, developments that threaten our shared values, sustaining peace in our societies. Adding to this crisis, hate speech and disinformation are gaining ground, often fueled by narratives that manipulate history for political ends. Armenia is very familiar with these challenges. Beyond our security concerns, confronting daily, we face the history and cultural identity distortion, possible distortion. The instrumentalization of history to advance divisive agendas threatens the peaceful coexistence we all seek. It is absolutely unacceptable to deny history, realities, or to manipulate and falsify history to justify territorial claims against neighboring countries. History should serve as a foundation of truth, paving the way for reconciliation, and not as a tool to advancing divisive and misleading agendas. Another serious thing I would like to bring your attention to is hate speech in state-sponsored history textbooks, which fosters aggression, intolerance, and racism. When educational resources are weaponized to instill prejudice narratives, they undermine peace and perpetuate harmful stereotypes. It is very essential we counter these dangerous trends by promoting accurate, balanced history teaching that respects diversity and rejects all forms of hatred and discrimination, preventing ethnic cleansings, hate-motivated conflicts, and crimes against humanity. Identifying these challenges is only the beginning. Our responsibility now is to work collectively towards solutions. Building a culture of peace starts with innovative, citizen-centered education that empowers young people to critically engage with history rather than passively accept it. This requires sustained efforts and cooperation to develop educational system grounding democracy and concept of living together. Armenia is committed to this endeavor and supporting initiatives that brings historical truth to the front. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Ghazaryan. Our next speaker is Ms. Marietta Karamanli. Please, Madam.
No. Ça y est.
Right. Thank you, Madam President. Madam Rapporteur, dear colleagues. I would like first of all to thank the Rapporteur for her work, which is timely to improve teaching of history today with the youngest students, which is difficult because of the implications that this paradigm change might have, and concrete because of the recommendations and ways out that it suggests. Multi-perspectivity in teaching, be it formal or informal, so as to go back to a distinction which the rapporteur makes, could be defined in a summary way as an approach which attempts to take into consideration a diversity of perspectives which will enrich the understanding of the world over time. Human and social sciences, by their nature, are areas which are partly open to interpretation. And our present moment has been marked by negation by some who make a difference between science and research. And some events or facts or movements must be established and considered as such, and unless they are disproved, considered to be the basis on which research is undertaken and interpretation may happen. That is the point under discussion. Just as we are commemorating the liberation of concentration camps and the end of genocide, radical extremists are casting into question, as they have before, the very existence and goal of those camps and the genocide. In France, this isn't just an opinion, it's a crime concerning contesting the existence of crimes against humanity. And the shared contribution made by historians, researchers, teachers, players, and obviously victims is not only useful, but also necessary, allowing us to make progress in knowledge and to make commemoration possible. I should also like to make two observations here, Madam Rapporteur. Training of teachers is very important. Progress cannot happen unless we take account of what their training is about at the time when medias and social networks and the cultural and societal environment and context have been overturned by the existence of internet. Education on media has a very important role to play here. This shouldn't lead to a decrease in the place and the role of teachers, but rather, on the contrary, to increase their place and their role. At the same time, there cannot be progress without opening up schools with partnerships with all cultural, citizen, and research institutions. And here, once again, being collegial, listening, having different places for research should allow us to have high-quality expertise. That's what I wanted very quickly to share with you, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Merci, Madame Karamanli. Our next speaker is Madame Maria Mezentseva-Fedorenko. Please, Madame, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Colleagues, I want to start with a very unknown and interesting history of 400 young students from Ukraine who, on this day, 107 years ago, in 1918, prevented the possible annexation of the current capital of Ukraine, Kiev. They fought to death against 4,000 group of Bolsheviks and defeated them and protected the current modern territory of Ukraine. Commemorating them today, we understand how important it is in the school, university curriculum to study and learn history. History untold, history reversed, history mixed, and in the end, we are finding ourselves in multiple dimensions of war of aggressions, mass war crimes, crimes against humanity, deportations, starvations, killings, and rape. My family and many Ukrainian families, as well as many European families and across the globe, were experiencing this historical injustice. If my grandma wouldn't have survived Great Famine of the beginning of 20th century, I wouldn't have been speaking here in front of you. But when Stalin was committing this crime, a crime of genocide, intending to wipe us off from planet Earth, as Putin is doing today in the 21st century, I would just be not telling the true history today. I want to remind you, colleagues, that we are all interlinked here in the Council of Europe. The queens of 11th century, and I would like to name them, Queen France Anna, Queen of Norway and Denmark Olisova or Elizaveta, Queen of Hungary Anastasia, Queen of Scotland Margarita, all of them have Ukrainian roots actually. We're all interlinked. Our history has to be properly told. And because until today, such terrorists as Putin, such terrorists as Lukashenko, who wrote himself 83% of the recent elections, such people who are oppressing today the democratic forces in Georgia, all these people are trying to rewrite our common history. To prevent it in the school curriculum, Assembly underlines the possibility of manipulating research and facts and the tools of propaganda. And that's why history has to be enshrined, strengthened, and taught properly, specifically of course, 19th and 20th century. I would like to thank the rapporteur for her courage and the full-lined committee to develop this text. I'm sure it must be implemented by all our ministers of education, locally and at the government level. Thank you very much.
Дякую, Madam Mezentseva. Now I invite Ms. Victoria Tsiblo to have her speech. Please, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Wise words from the philosopher George Santayana back in 1905. And I came to think of that quote as I read the quite thought-provoking report of our rapporteur, Madame Martinez-Seyo, on behalf of our Culture and Education Committee, entitled Multiperspectivity in Remembrance and History Education for Democratic Citizenship. Multiperspectivity may be a newly minted word, but it simply means that in studying different historical periods of personalities, we should do so not just from only one viewpoint, but from several, whether it be the American Civil War, the Russian Revolution, or the First World War. And we must do so in discussions with others, with due respect for their opinions, opinions which may differ from our own views, just as ours may be at variance at times. As the rapporteur points out, such dialogue and tolerance are all the more called for at the present tense moment of international tensions in Europe and beyond, where an erosion of democracy and social polarization seem to be taking place, and that the number of countries that are democracies are diminishing instead of increasing. That is a very sad development and something that would definitely will affect our coming generations. The report in conclusion argues that the time has come for the subject of history to be given back its due place at all levels in schools, university and the media, and I fully agree. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Now, the next on the list is Ms. Margot Greenwood. Please, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President. Honorable colleagues, I begin by acknowledging and thanking Rapporteur Martinez-Sejo for her work on the report. As an Indigenous woman and professor for 27 years, I unequivocally agree with the inclusion of sensitive histories in school curricula and consideration of multiple perspectives as fundamental means to reinforce democratic culture, pluralism, and human rights within society, and for all the reasons that previous speakers have already articulated. In Canada, this fact remains true. Since the creation of Canada as a country in 1867, recurrent governments have been complicit and have committed acts of violence and discrimination against Indigenous peoples. The establishment and forced attendance of Indigenous children in residential schools is one of the most distressing chapters in Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples. In the name of cultural assimilation, the state forcibly removed Indigenous children as young as 3 years old from their families, placing them in far-flung boarding schools where many endured unimaginable harms and have often never returned until they were 16 years old, if they returned at all. Between the 1870 and 1996, at least 150,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children suffered this fate. At least 6,000 children perished as a result. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued its final report, Honoring the Truth, Reconciling for the Future, an 8-year-long investigation into Canada's brutal residential schools. The final report issued 94 calls to action. They addressed various areas highlighted in Rapporteur Martinez-Sejo's report, including the need for countries to address their difficult and sensitive past through education and remembrance. As a case in point, Call to Action 62 calls on all governments in Canada to make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties, and Aboriginal peoples' contributions to Canada. Many schools across Canada have now mandated Indigenous curriculum. As for remembrance, in 2021, a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation was established on September 30th. Many know it as Orange Shirt Day, as we wear orange shirts to remember the children and their families of residential schools. Many of these calls of actions have yet to be fully implemented, but we are hopeful that Canada will continue to address these harms of the past. And in conclusion, education and remembrance play a key role in addressing these wrongs while promoting the democracy we all strive for. Hi, hi.
Thank you, Madam Greenwood. Our next speaker is Madam Yevgenia Kravchuk. Please, Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, dear Luz, thank you for this report. You know, in Ukraine, we say that our kids do not need textbooks to learn history. They can just look out of the window. My daughter turns 11 tomorrow. And that's actually the amount of years the occupation is, because it was in February, the end of February 2014, then the Green soldiers appeared in Crimea and the annexation began. And first, what the occupiers did, they threw away history books that were in the schools. And right now, peers of my daughter are learning in schools that Ukrainians are not a nation, they do not have a language. Those teenagers that were 15, 14 in 2014 now are being drawn to Russian army to fight their fellow Ukrainians. And actually, Russia is just continuing to do what Soviet Union did. How many of you know what is the contribution of Ukrainians during the Second World War? Did you know that 7 million of Ukrainian soldiers served in Soviet army? Did you know that half of them didn't return home? Did you know that 5 million of civilians were killed? Every fourth Ukrainian was killed during Second World War. But Russia tries to privatize the great victory in Second World War, forgetting the contribution of other nations. Actually, it was a Ukrainian soldier, a Soviet soldier at that time, who put the flag of victory on the Reichstag in May 1945. And you know what else Russia does right now? They manipulate history to justify the aggression. They actually say that, Ukraine is not a nation, Ukrainians are not a nation, Ukraine is not a country, so that's why they can occupy and forget about the rules and internationally recognized borders. Should we allow to do that? I urge you to continue to support Ukraine in its fight for independence, for sovereignty, because right now, from your support depend what your kids will learn in history books, in textbooks about this war. Whether, those who started the war, as Russians say, because that's the NATO countries who are an aggressor, or will put the facts and the peace will be justful, and we will be sure that our kids will learn the history that is based on facts. Thank you so much, and please support the resolution.
Thank you, Madam Kravchuk. Now I ask Lord Leslie Griffiths to take the floor. Please.
Madam President, friends and colleagues, one of the main streams of historiography right now is called post-colonial history, and it examines the way that countries often represented in this very hemicycle manage the affairs of countries far away. If you asked historians, even historians, what was the first significant defeat of Napoleon, for example, they might debate between the withdrawal from Moscow in 1812 or the defeat at Waterloo in 1815. Few of them would talk about the 1st of January 1804, when Napoleon's great army was defeated by slaves in Haiti, Saint-Domingue at the time, and instituted a new republic, the Republic of Haiti, which was abandoned by France. 200 years ago this year, France imposed an indemnity on Haiti of several million francs of that time, now billions, it would be its equivalent, in order to recognize the existence of Haiti and to receive money that was on an installment basis 3 times each year the total of the gross national product of the independent Haiti. I could tell the story in far greater detail, but that's enough for the moment. But we could talk too about the humiliation of Haiti by Germany with its war boat diplomacy, rubbishing the Haitian flag, imposing indemnities and sanctions on Haiti, which was barely surviving. Or a British diplomat writing a scandalous book that trashed the reputation of Haiti in the 1870s. And all that without coming to the American occupation that lasted 20 years and that just quite simply violated, raped Haiti of all its resources and imposed on it debts that it could never repay. You'll think it's strange that I bring into this august assembly tales of somewhere that has nothing to do with Europe. It has everything to do with Europe. And I've spent my entire life trying to articulate the needs of people who had no chance to articulate it itself. History belongs to the strong, those who can write, those who can organize. 500,000 slaves had none of those luxuries. History has to be learned in order to do justice, not just to the strong nations represented here, but to those with no voice, no place. If I were to ask people here to give me 3 words to describe my beloved Haiti, where I lived for 10 years, if I were asked everybody here to put 3 words down, they'd all be scandalous, believing the trash that is written about Haiti, which is a basket case where les miséreux de la terre live, the poorest country in the Western world, and all the result of nations represented in this hemicycle.
Thank you, Lord Griffiths. And now the next speaker is Mr. Konur Koçak. Please, Mr.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for this well-crafted report, which underscores the essential role of history education in fostering democratic citizenship. In today's Europe, where societies face increasing polarization and where we witness the alarming rise of xenophobia, hate crimes, and discrimination, it is vital for young people to engage with the past in a way that is free of prejudice. History education must serve as a tool to counter these divisive trends by promoting critical thinking, empathy, and an appreciation of diversity. Understanding the consequences of prejudice and intolerance is vital in recognizing the untold stories of oppressed minorities, such as the Meskhetian Turks, whose tragic history deserves our urgent attention. I wish to draw attention to the plight of the Meskhetian Turks and remind you that last year marked the 80th anniversary of their forced displacement from their homelands in southwest Georgia by the Soviet regime. In 1944, they endured a forced exile under unbearable conditions, leading to the loss of thousands of lives, tragedies that remain largely unknown and insufficiently acknowledged in many parts of the world. Today, the Meskhetian community remains scattered across countries. Despite the passage of decades, Meskhetians continue to face systemic injustices and the enduring consequences of their forced displacement. It is, I believe, the moral responsibility of this august assembly to recognize their suffering and take concrete steps to address their grievances. Acknowledgement is a crucial step towards justice and reconciliation. I am pleased to note that this assembly has previously addressed the plight of the Meskhetian Turks in 2005 with a resolution numbered 1428, where it urged the Georgian and Russian authorities to remove all legal and practical barriers denying their civic rights. However, these efforts have proven insufficient. Therefore, I call all members of this assembly to support the written declaration that I have tabled on PACE apps, with the aim of remembering one of the darkest chapters of history. A strong show of support will send a clear message of recognition and solidarity, and hopefully pave the way for further action to address the plight of the Meskhetian Turks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koçak. Our next speaker is Mr. Paweł Jabłoński. Please, sir. It seems he's not here, so we'll move to Ms. Esther Peña. Please, madam. Please.
Muy buenos días.
So, good morning. Liberty, memory, and responsibility. Real liberty is that which allows us to vote, to demonstrate, to express our ideas, and live according to them without fear of repression, censorship, or that somebody will drag us out of our bed, throw us out of our job, or ostracize us socially. It allows us to build a free society, a society free of hatred, and alliances woven upon the basis of human rights and coexistence, tolerance, respect, and remembering our past, all part of it. And as convinced Democrats, and in order to disseminate this message, well, this is our particular task. Education, political policies on memory are absolutely key so that people don't fall into the web of hate speech, of the airs of terror. This requires a profound reflection to provide responses to these various key issues. The government of Spain has a commitment, and that is to disseminate knowledge about exile, resistance, the struggle to re-achieve those liberties that were lost for many years. 50 years since the dictatorship in Spain collapsed. The necessity of understanding the importance of democracy and the necessity to guarantee and to bolster it, and of course to fight against those that limit this democracy or provide false hopes through easy wealth, for example. It's absolutely key for us to understand that Spain is the country with the most mass graves of pits in the world. For example, one with 45 brains and one heart. Many suffered in Spain. The right has forgotten those. Extremists have forgotten those. The fact that Spaniards suffered in concentration camps as well. It is education that will help us to create a society peaceful, tolerant, which will eliminate those elements of moral degradation. And undoubtedly, we will achieve this through truth, justice, and reparation. Thank you.
I ask Mr. Damien Cotier to take the floor. Vous avez la parole, Monsieur Cotier.
You have the floor, sir. Thank you, Madam President. This is an important debate, and it's part of a context which makes it even more important. I'd like to thank the rapporteur for the work he's done and the fact of putting this on our assembly once again. We've already looked at it, but it's important to come back to it regularly in a historical context where this debate has taken on a specific dimension. I'm lucky enough to have studied history, and when we work in that field, we're struck by the very basic things we leave at the very beginning of a history degree. The critical thinking, to look at sources to make sure that they are genuine documents. They can show you in the history of the Middle Ages, for instance, the beginning of the calendar year was not necessarily January 1st. You can have documents dated in February of a year which didn't correspond to the calendar we have today, but rather the previous year or the following year. And it's very important to have this ability to read things, to analyze them in their context. That takes time, it's complex, but it's essential in today's society, which is flooded with fake news and prejudice, in particular on social networks, but not only. even in high-quality press organs, we read things that are not necessarily put into their proper context, that are more or less true with more or less perspective. When we listen to today's debate, I'd like to thank my colleagues who took the floor, and I'd like to think of the two amazing films made by a great American director, Clint Eastwood. The first was called Flag of Our Fathers, and Letter from Iwo Jima. And those two films tell the story of the same historic battle of World War II on the Japanese island of Iwo Jima, once told from the viewpoint of an American soldier and the other from the viewpoint of Japanese soldiers. And it's fascinating to see those two films, to see that the context in which we put a dramatic historical event such as this can be subject to interpretation of the events which transpire. And this is what we need to work on. It is essential in the very dangerous world in which we are living today, with this very deliberate dissemination by autocrats and populists of fake news, that each and every one of us be able to defend democracy and be able to read and to interpret and to put things in context. Teaching history contributes to this in an essential way. Thank you, Madam, for reminding us of that. And I hope that the Assembly will also recall this in an emphatic way before the very important commemoration we'll have of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which will follow. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Cotier. Now I ask Mr. Pedro Miguel Aches Barba to take the floor. Please.
Con su permiso, Presidenta.
If you'll allow me, Madam President, I'd like to congratulate our colleague for the work she's done as rapporteur. With respectful greetings from Mexico for all of you, ladies and gentlemen, as members of Parliament of the world, in the context of the recent commemoration of Education Day on January 24th, we spoke out to defend pluralism and truth over and above ignorance and violence and the threats which are ever more polarized in today's world. Education should be the best vector for transforming the lives of people, for fairness and equality and respect. And the voices and perspectives for new development are linked together so as to bring together sustainable peace and an area of stability, peace, and confidence for coming generations. Education needs to be fed by a relevant idea of history to understand the present and build a better future. And there should be a bridge between the divisions which presently separate peoples. Historical memory should be something that just doesn't exist on one side, but rather it should be a plural, diversified space where different stories can be told and different voices can be heard, talking about our collective shared past. History is building, and each society has the right to have its own vision, looking at the successes but also the errors that have been made. Our President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico is implementing an educational model for Mexican schools with a historical vision of the great transformations that took place in our country, with a critical humanistic view based on principles of national identity and full self-determination. Preserving our self-determination, human dignity, culture, participating in the transformation of society, and respect for nature and the environment. This makes us ever greater promoters of these three proposals. First of all, to have a revision of the humanist nature. Secondly, ongoing teacher training. And thirdly, international cooperation. All of this so as to promote transnationality, exchange of teaching materials and research resources, promoting innovation in science, technology, with digital platforms that are multilingual, to which students may access with eyewitness testimonies and other documents that are important for their learning. To this extent, it is important to note what UNESCO has suggested, that we guarantee the need to have a focus on integrating artificial intelligence and human learning so that students may develop the necessary needs to navigate the complexities of this technological world, understanding ethical principles and guaranteeing fair access to same. Historical memory can be found in hate speech as well and in other forms of unpleasant discussion. We build society not only at the voting booth but also in classrooms. Let us make this a tangible reality. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Christophe Chailloux. Please.
Madame la Présidente, mes chers collègues, je veux...
Madam President, colleagues, I'd like first of all to congratulate our colleague Luis Martinez-Sejo his report, which bears testimony to the specific link that exists between the teaching of history and the development and preservation of democratic values. At a time when we are commemorating the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the camp Auschwitz-Birkenau, and given there an increasingly dwindling number of witnesses from the time, it's important for us to give thought to just what we can do to maintain the memory of this tragedy, the Shoah, which profoundly marked Europe. On Monday this week, I attended with my constituent Orléans a commemoration ceremony at the Study and Research Center on the internment camps in the Loiret department, and along with in Beaune-la-Rolande, where a number of children were deported to Auschwitz. I therefore attended this ceremony in the presence of Joseph Weissman, one of the rare child survivors from this deportation, which was carried out following the roundup of the Veldiv in 1942. Secondary school children, large numbers of them, attended this ceremony, and I think it's ever so important for the youngest people to go to visit these places of remembrance and to discuss them with the survivors when there are still survivors, to talk about these tragic events which have a huge important impact on the history of our nations and our continent. I therefore fully endorse the emphasis placed by our colleague Martinez-Sejo on the synergies that should be developed between formal and non-formal education, on the importance of developing partnerships between schools and cultural institutions, for example, museums and memorial sites. But this whole notion of memorial sites encourages us to carry out discussions on multiperspectivity. The French historian Pierre Nora, who carried out huge important work on the places of memory, said, "History is now written under the pressure of collective memories which seek to compensate for the historical uprooting of society and the anxiety of the future by emphasizing a past that was not previously experienced as such." He explained that an object becomes a place memory when it escapes oblivion, for example, through the affixing of commemorative plaques, and when a community reclaims it with its feelings and emotions. The relationship with history in our societies, of course, creates tension, and this is being carried out at a time when there is increasing polarization in all our countries. It also sheds light on how we revisit our past. Now look at all the debates that are currently being held in our towns and villages with regard to the advisability of keeping a certain statue or the name of a street. So I fully share the guidelines in this report which is being put forward to us, and it's ever so important to make this part of civic education, developing a citizen who is able to have a critical analysis and to understand the scope and the consequence of certain discourse, in particular populist and xenophobic discourse. So I will fully share and vote for the draft recommendation, draft resolution today. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Ms. Mira Nieminen. Please, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President and dear colleagues. History is an extremely important subject. It is not merely a list of dates or events, but a story of where we come from, where we are, and where we are headed. History plays a central role in shaping the future, because without an understanding of the past, we cannot make sustainable and wise decisions for the future. Studying history allows us to understand the past and learn from the mistakes made by previous generations. History provides examples of both success and failures, and these examples are crucial when building societies and new generations. By knowing why certain events led to specific outcomes, we can avoid repeating the same mistakes. history that serves as both a guide and a warning. Passing knowledge from the generation to next is essential. If this change breaks, we lose our connection to our roots and where we come from. Teaching history is a way to ensure that our culture and values remain vibrant for future generations. Without this continuity, we cannot understand our shared identity and our place in the world. Additionally, studying history helps us understand different cultures and their values. By learning about the history of other countries and peoples, we can better appreciate their perspectives and understand why they think and act in certain ways. Teaching history is not just about memorizing facts. It is also about developing critical thinking and judgment skills. Through history, we learn to question, analyze events, and understand cause and effect relationships. These skills are needed in all areas of life. Therefore, teaching history is not just about preserving the past. It is an investment in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Dear colleagues, I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that the typewritten texts can be submitted electronically if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. We will now hear from the committee. I call Ms. Luz Martinez Seijo, rapporteur, to reply. You have 3 minutes, Madam, please.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Muchísimas gracias.
Many thanks. As an educator and a politician, I feel deeply thankful for this unanimous support from practically each and every one of you concerning my report. This report shows some very important aspects of the futures of our society, and it's clear that we need to commemorate freedom and democracy, which don't come for free. In Spain, we know this very well. Spain was at the bottom of international rankings for democratic quality, but today it's one of the fullest democracies on those same ranking lists. What is important is to be able to transmit to our young people the importance of living in democracy, because if you spent your whole life living in democracy, it's easy to forget the enormous strengths of such a system. And this has to be shored up by messages and things concerning safety and wealth traded in for restricting rights. And this is a threat we see in all of our societies today. History, however, shows us that freedom is never gained forever. You can have it for almost a century, and then you can see a situation in which democracies are turned into dictatorships and the rights of 1 out of 3 Europeans are eliminated. This has happened before, but it must never happen again. And in this report, we have a whole series of detailed recommendations to improve history teaching and to promote democratic citizenship. Curriculums which are made more flexible and give priority to development, to skills, and focusing on students' needs. Integrating democratic citizenship education. The speaker's microphone has gone off. We apologize.
It's not working. Okay. Okay. Again.
As a subject which is obligatory and strengthening skills for democratic citizenship at all levels of education, as we've mentioned before. Teacher training. It's necessary to make this part of the framework of reference of skills for democratic culture, and both basic and ongoing training of teachers with innovative methodologies and resources, forms of cooperation that facilitate alliances between schools, museums, institutions, NGOs, and artists, so as to create educational units for more significant and dynamic forms of history teaching. Also, informal methods of guaranteeing resources and finances for places of memory and museums to make sure that they are safe places to learn about democracy. It's the opposite of what happened in the Gulag Museum in Russia, which received our prize and whose director was fired for refusing to change text on Stalin's errors. Finally, let's think about the role of places of memory as spaces of truth, reconciliation, and human rights. Overall, the report tries to provide an overall framework for rethinking history teaching as a means for reinforcing social cohesion, encouraging social diversity, and preparing future generations to confront democratic challenges of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Rapporteur. Now I have to ask Mr. Yunus Emre if he wishes to speak on behalf of the committee. Please, sir.
History education should be a key part of human rights education and a foundation for young people to develop democratic citizenship, which is based on the respect for different opinions, pluralism, tolerance, and diversity. In our committee, we strongly believe that multiperspectivity and the appropriate handling of controversial and sensitive issues in history lessons can be a powerful tool to support peace and reconciliation in our societies. However, delivering quality history education in schools can be very challenging due to overloaded curricula, traditional teaching practices, and in many instances, highly centralized education systems. Education systems must therefore adapt social changes and the growing diversity in our societies and adequately respond with new curricula and interactive methodologies. In September 2023, the Standing Conference of Ministers of Education provided political momentum for the renewal of the civic mission of education as part of the new Council of Europe Education Strategy 2024-2030, Learners First, Education for Today's and Tomorrow's Democratic Societies. The Council of Europe Guiding Principles for Quality History Education and the Reference Framework of Competences for Democratic Culture are indeed excellent tools to be promoted and broadly implemented in our member states. We propose in the draft resolution that education for democratic citizenship should be included in school curricula, both as a distinct compulsory subject and as part and parcel of other relevant subjects, such as history teaching. This should be done during all stages of formal education, primary, secondary, and higher education. It should also form a constituent part of vocational training and non-formal education. In the draft recommendation, we call on the Committee of Ministers to provide support and assistance to member states to review their education policies and integrate in national education curricula the Council of Europe Guiding Principles for History Education and the Reference Framework of Competences for Democratic Culture. To achieve this important mission, it is necessary to continue to financially support the different Council of Europe activities relating to history education and ensure synergies between the different strands of intergovernmental program and the Observatory on History Teaching in Europe. We also propose to encourage creating further links and transversality between the Council of Europe activities on culture, heritage, education, and youth. Finally, all member states are encouraged to join the partial agreement and take part in the activities of the observatory. On behalf of the Cultural Committee, I invite you to back the proposals that are outlined in the draft resolution and the draft recommendation with your vote today and in your parliaments tomorrow. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Emre. Dear colleagues, our debate is closed now and we'll move to the voting. So the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media has presented a draft resolution to which 7 amendments and 2 sub-amendments have been tabled, and a draft recommendation to which no amendments have been tabled. We will start by considering the draft resolution. Any amendment which has been unanimously approved by the committee seized for report shall not be put to the vote in plenary and shall be declared as definitively approved unless 10 or more members of the Assembly object. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 3 and 4 be declared as approved. Amendment 1 was also unanimously approved, but was sub-amended and will therefore require separate consideration. I repeat, Amendment 1 must be called separately as we must deal with the sub-amendment. Is that so, Mr. Emre?
Yes, it is unanimously approved.
Okay, thank you. If no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be approved. Is there an objection? If there is, we will need to verify that the objection has the required support of 10 people. Please, could those who object raise their hand?
No objection.
I see no objection, so Amendment 3 and 4 to the draft resolution are therefore approved and will not be called. Any amendment which has been rejected by the committee seized for a report by a 2/3 majority of the votes cast shall not be put to the vote in plenary and shall be declared as definitively rejected, unless 10 or more members of the Assembly object. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 2 and 7 to the draft resolution, which were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority, be declared as rejected. Amendment 5 was also rejected by a 2/3 majority, but as it was subsequently sub-amended, it will require separate consideration. I repeat, Amendment 5 must be called separately as we must deal with the sub-amendment. Is that so, Mr. Emre?
Yes, Madam, that's true.
Thank you. If no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be rejected. Is there an objection? If there is, we will need to verify that the objection has the required support of 10 people. Please, could those who object raise their hand?
No objection.
I see no objection, so Amendments 2 and 7 to the draft resolution are therefore rejected and will not be called. Now I call Ms. Yevgenia Kravchuk to support Amendment 1. You have 30 seconds, Madam.
So, thank you. The amendment is about how Russian Federation distorts history and uses it to justify the aggression, and also it underlines the role of evidence-based history to fight disinformation, such campaigns as Russian Federation is waging against Ukraine and against other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kravchuk, and now I call Ms. Luz Martinez-Seijo on behalf of the committee to support the sub-amendment. Please, Madam.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have agreed on a text as a sub-amendment, which is included in the amendment proposed text, which is recalling its resolution 2558, 2024, and recommendation 2280, 2024, on countering the racial and cultural identity in war and peace.
Dear colleagues, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the sub-amendment? Yes? No? Okay, there is no one. Does Ms. Yevgenia Kravchuk want to provide her opinion on the sub-amendment? Please.
I agree, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Kravchuk. So the committee is obviously in favor of the sub-amendment. I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. So I see that the sub-amendment is adopted. Now we come to the main amendment 1, as sub-amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I see no one. The committee unanimously accepted this amendment and supports the sub-amendment. Okay. I shall now put the amendment to the vote as sub-amended. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. So the amendment is agreed.
Page 12.
Dear colleagues, I understand that Mr. Pablo Hispain wishes to withdraw Amendment 6. Is that so? Okay, thank you, Mr. Hispain. Does anyone else wish to move it? I see no one. So the amendment is withdrawn.
Page 15.
Now I call Mr. Pablo Hispain to support Amendment 5. You have 30 seconds. Have you put your badge?
Now.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Esta enmienda lo que quiere introducir es una...
This amendment is making reference to terrorist groups, one of the enemies of our freedoms and the different threats which Europe has had, and our freedoms over the course of history, and particularly in the 20th century.
Thank you. I call now Ms. Luz Martinez-Seijo on behalf of the committee to support the sub-amendment. Please, Madam, you have 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. We talked about making this change, not changing the term which they suggest, but rather adding, after the original text of the amendment, the words victims of terrorist groups.
Thank you, Madam. Does anyone want to speak against the sub-amendment? I see no one. Does Mr. Pablo Hispain want to provide his opinion?
Acepto la subenmienda.
I accept this amendment.
Thank you. The committee is obviously in favor of the sub-amendment, and I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call now for the result to be displayed. The sub-amendment is agreed. Now we can come to the main amendment 5 as sub-amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I see no one. The committee unanimously accepted the amendment with the sub-amendment. I shall now put the amendment as sub-amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. So the amendment 5 as sub-amended is agreed.
Page 18.
We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16019 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is open, dear colleagues. The vote is closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 16019 is, as amended, is adopted. Dear colleagues, we will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation contained in document 16019. A two-thirds majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. Dear colleagues, the draft recommendation in document 16019 is adopted. Okay. Dear colleagues, I proposed that the urgent debate titled European Commitment to a Just and Lasting Peace in Ukraine, currently scheduled for the afternoon session on Thursday, 30 January, we be removed to the morning. Does anyone object to this proposal? I see no one, so the proposal is adopted. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Dear colleagues, good morning. As set out on the agenda, we will now turn to the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp and hear several speeches. Dear Chief Rabbi Meir Lau, dear Secretary General, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we gathered today in our hemicycle to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. The presence of Chief Rabbi Meir Lau under the vaulted ceiling of this hemicycle is profoundly symbolic. I would describe this chamber as a temple of democracy, a central place to worship the shared values of European democracy. European democracy as we know it would be unimaginable without a commitment to remembrance. Chief Rabbi, I express my deepest gratitude to you for traveling such a great distance to share your invaluable testimony, the living voice of those who endured the unimaginable horrors of the Holocaust. We listen to your words with reverence. We record them and we pledge to pass them on to the future generations. Never again, no more, nie wieder. Sadly, the memory of the Shoah has not yet transformed these words into an enduring reality. First proclaimed by pacifists after the First World War, the slogan failed to prevent the devastation of the Second. Revived in the aftermath of the Holocaust and the horrors of the death camps like Auschwitz, it could not stop the genocides in Rwanda and Srebrenica, for example. Even in today's world, shaped by progress and transformation, never again does not shield us from exclusion, scapegoating, and the eruption of hatred towards certain groups. As we come together to mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, we are reminded of a tragedy so profound that it challenges our understanding. The Holocaust, a devastating assault on humanity and the human spirit, continues to demand reflection on how such darkness was allowed to emerge. We know what was happened, but do we fully understand why? This incomprehension should not deter us from fulfilling our duty to remember and to act. It is vital for our Assembly, which must lead by example and set the tone. It is equally crucial for support and development of remembrance sites and the need for mainstreaming the history into educational curricula. Just this morning, we debated and adopted a resolution on this critical topic. While we may never fully understand Holocaust, your testimony, Chief Rabbi, along with our collective efforts to preserve and transmit memory, will bear fruit. Your legacy will help to build and sustain a community of writers, a community that endures today and continues to oppose tyranny and injustice wherever they appear. They act for us now and give us the hope for the future. I want to believe in it with all my heart. Thank you again, Chief Rabbi, for joining us today. I now call the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Mr. Alain Berset, for his statement.
Dear Chief Rabbi Lau, dear President Rousopoulos, Excellencies, dear guests. There is hope for your future, says the book of Jeremiah, and your children will return home. It is with this passage that Chief Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, our keynote speaker today, begins his memoir. There is hope for your future, and your children will return home. But too many children never came home from the Nazi concentration and extermination camps. Too many mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, uncles and aunts were lost. Entire families were destroyed. That is why we are here today, in this chamber of the Council of Europe, a center of action for European democracy, to honor the victims of the Holocaust, to listen to the survivors who are still with us, and to heed their call to keep watch, to not let history repeat itself. It is not just our duty, it is a sacred obligation. So on this day, 8 years after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we stand against the surge in anti-Semitism. We remember that the crimes of the Shoah were committed in Europe by Europeans, and we commit to our young people and their future. And I say this as the Secretary General of our organization and as a father of three. A new survey by the Claims Conference found that many young Europeans have never heard of the Holocaust, including 46% here in France. These shocking numbers are a wake-up call. What would Simone Veil, the French Holocaust survivor and first woman president of the European Parliament, say about this moment? Elle qui disait, lorsque nous étions au...
When we were in the camp, it was important to hope that some would come back so that we could know what had happened.
In Auschwitz, Birkenau, Buchenwald, and all the other Nazi concentration and extermination camps, and to act so that it never happens again. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the test before us. One of the very reasons why our founders created the Council of Europe. Because when we allow impunity to go unpunished, we empower the enemies of democracy. Because hatred has no place on our continent. And because, as Auschwitz survivor Marian Turski, 98, said on Monday, let us not be afraid to convince ourselves that problems can be resolved between neighbors. I thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. Dear colleagues, Chief Rabbi, we will now proceed by listening the statements by the leaders of the 5 political groups of this Assembly. I call Mr. Frank Svabe, the leader of the Green Socialists and Democrats, to take the floor. Frank.
Dear Mr. President, dear honorable guests, I'm speaking today not only as group leader, but also as the head of the German delegation. That fills me with awe. The Holocaust is a crime against humanity that to this day exceeds my imagination. It has brutally cost the lives of various population groups, including LGBTIQ, the community of Roma and Traveler, and 6 million Jews. There are so many terrible images that are burned into the memory, and there are no pictures of many more terrible events. This house, the Council of Europe, is built on the ruins of the Second World War and the Holocaust. I remember the meeting with my friend Emanuele Zingeres, the story of his family, the story of his mother as a Holocaust survivor in Struthof, close to Danzig. The history of the theater in Vilnius, which is now a museum. And I had the honor of visiting the museum last year at Emanuele's invitation. Thank you so much for this trust. I also particularly remember the stories of the children who fell victim of the madness of the German National Socialist, little innocent children. And it is the works of art of Samuel Bach, an impressive artist who created images that express the incomprehensibility of this genocide and the struggle of Jews for their own identity that the Nazis wanted to erase. Please look at these pictures. Today we commemorate the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. These images are completely emaciated. Prisoners, corpses, things like glasses and shoes are also burned into the memory. But it was a relief, and with it a hope that something like that will never happen again. But we must be vigilant. Nothing is over, everything is still there. And that's why I want to conclude by quoting Margot Friedlander, a Holocaust survivor, 103 years old. Be people, be careful. Think of yourselves, think of what was. Remember that they were people. People. We all have the same blood, no Christian, Jewish, Muslim blood, human blood.
Thank you, Frank. I call now Mr. Pablo Hispan, the leader of the European People's Party. Pablo, you have the floor.
Thank you, President, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, Chief Rabbi, representatives of family of deceased and survivors of Shoah. In this temple of democracy, as the President of the PACE has called this room, we are gathered together today to mark in a solemn manner one of the blackest period, nay, the darkest period in humankind. We may feel that it is our credit to gather together to mark this anniversary, but my friends, it is our eternal shame that these events which we met to mark could ever be allowed to have taken place. This must not happen again, we have listened a lot of times. Unfortunately, has happened in form of anti-Semitism or terrorism, as we saw on October 7th. During the course of this week, our media channels have broadcast images of the events taking place this week in Auschwitz. One commentator reflected that her gaze fell not on the world leaders, but on the faces of the few remaining survivors of the camp, some of them revisiting Auschwitz for the first time since the liberation. Here, in this assembly, we have relatives of victims of Holocaust that are members of this chamber, as Frank has told our EPP colleague, Emanuele Singeris. None of us who did not experience that horror can know the pain of the camps, of the loss, of the emotional torment of families and communities being ripped apart, of the not knowing and the survivors' guilt carried by so many. As many have reminded us today, not knowing our history leaves us bound to repeat the mistake of our past. For this reason, I thank particularly the authorities of the Parliamentary Assembly and the Council for inviting to this event a group of school children, and I look forward to listening to their perspectives on these events. It is our duty to bear witness to the events of the past and to pass that memory to the generations not yet born. On behalf of the members of the EPP group of the Assembly, I bear witness to the past. I commit to remember it and sharing it with the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. I call now Mr. Julian Boulay, leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Dear President, dear Secretary General, dear Chief Rabbi Meyer Lau, allow me to start by quoting a bit of your remarkable memoir entitled Out of the Depths, which I find very striking. Today, looking back on the 6 years of that war, I realized that the worst thing I endured in the Holocaust was not the hunger, the cold, or the beatings. It was humiliation. It was almost impossible to bear the helplessness of unjustified humiliation.
helplessness becomes linked with that dishonor. Auschwitz-Birkenau is a symbol of the abyssal Nazi political project based on dishonor and dehumanization in a methodical and radical way, turning people into numbers. Our organization was founded to fight against the aberration put to practice by this extreme ideology. Today, of course, there are no more death camps in Europe, but we still see dehumanization, the blatant disregard of human life, freedom, rights, feeling that the Russian aggressor is bringing to Ukraine, where again the death of countless of people is considered not as an acceptable tragedy, but as statistics. For too long, we thought it was enough to believe that our dark history would not be repeated, but we see that it was not enough. We must do more than just believe, more than just hope. We must be extremely vigilant and relentless in fighting for our values of human rights and individual freedoms. No ideology, no reason, no budgetary consideration should be above that. We have no excuse. But the story of Auschwitz-Birkenau has another dimension that resonates with current events and debates. For it was also cruel, bitter, and monstrous lessons of how technological progress can become a source of pain, suffering, and death if it is not accompanied by humanistic perspective based on the values of human rights. The promise of artificial intelligence, big data, social networks, and automated systems can bring progress and prosperity. But our quest for technological progress should not be unchecked. It should obey the humanist ideals of a just and free society based on the principles of individual liberty. Otherwise, we risk creating new horrors as our civilization has done many times before. Finally, today, we cannot avoid the issue of far-right populism, which continues to corrode and corrupt our societies. We hope that the atrocities of the Second World War would be an antidote to anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and homophobia. But today we see that this is not the case. What is even more striking is that denial of Holocaust, homophobic and xenophobic hatred are widespread and growing, including on social networks. Therefore, the commemoration of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp should remain an occasion to renew our commitment to fight against hate speech and far-right ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. On behalf of the Conservatives and Patriots, I will call now the Vice President of the group, Mrs. Elisabetta Gardini. Elisabetta.
Thank you, dear Mr. President, honorable guests, dear colleagues. The Shoah stands as one of the darkest chapters in human history, a chilling reminder of what can happen when hatred goes unchecked. But let us remember this. The Shoah did not begin with the gas chambers. It began with words. It began with propaganda, dehumanization, and the slow, insidious erosion of empathy. It started with the labeling of Jews as the other, with hateful rhetoric, discrimination, and normalization of bigotry that paved the way for violence. This is a vital lesson for us today. Genocide and oppression are not sudden. They are the result of gradual steps, each one eroding moral boundaries. The words we use matter. Silence in the face of hate enables it to grow. Yet, anti-Semitism, the same poison that fueled the Shoah, is still alive. It lurks not only in extremist ideologies, but also in subtler forms, in conspiracy theories, casual stereotypes, and denial of Jewish suffering. Alarmingly, it is increasingly visible in certain migrant communities in the West, where anti-Semitic beliefs, often imported from regions of conflict, are allowed to fester. This is not a comfortable truth, but it is a reality we must confront. It is our responsibility to push back against this hatred, no matter where it comes from. Education, dialogue, and courage are our tools. We must teach the next generation that tolerance is not a weakness, but the foundation of a just society. And we must stand together against anti-Semitism in all its forms, whether it's on the streets, in politics, or online. The Shoah taught us the cost of indifference. Let us never forget that. And let us commit to being vigilant, to standing up for truth and humanity, so that never again is not just a phrase, but a promise we uphold. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. On behalf of the United European Left, Mr. George Loukaides. George.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, survivors, and dear Chief Rabbi. Today, 80 years after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau by the Red Army, we reflect upon the unimaginable suffering endured by millions of Jews, but also by thousands of communists, anti-fascists, trade unionists, Roma people, disabled individuals, political prisoners, and homosexuals who were brutalized by the Third Reich. We pay tribute to all victims. However, Auschwitz-Birkenau is not just a symbol of suffering. It is also a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the resilience of those who survived, and the profound lessons we must carry forward in order history not to be repeated. On the occasion of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, it is important to recall the dangerous ideologies of hatred that gave rise to such horrors and take stock of their historic significance. As these atrocities were not born in a vacuum, but were rather the result of deeply entrenched systems of oppression, discrimination, and dehumanization. As United European Left, we underlined that our commitment to human rights is inseparable from our fight against the systems of inequality and injustice that still pervade our societies. Intolerance, racism, anti-Semitism, fascism, Islamophobia, and xenophobia are not merely issues of the past, but pressing issues of the present that we must condemn and eradicate with concrete action. Dear colleagues, we should not ignore the rise of far-right and neo-fascist movements across Europe, US, and beyond that often seek to resurrect Nazi ideologies. Fascism of the 21st century is a threat not only to the Jewish community, but also to our democratic values and principles. The European left will stand in solidarity with all vulnerable, marginalized, and oppressed peoples, regardless of their background, and embrace diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I will call now Madame Georgina Laboda, who will speak on behalf of the community of Roma and travelers. Can you please press the button? Just a moment, just a moment. Dear Julian, can you give your badge, please? Thank you. Can you please come to the rostrum? Please come to the rostrum.
Yes.
Yes, here. Thank you.
You think? Yes? Thank you. Thank you. Dear Secretary General Berzé, dear President of the Parliamentarian Assembly, Rosopoulos, their Excellencies, dear all, I am afraid that Europe is forgetting its past and that Auschwitz is only sleeping. These are the poignant words of Tseja Stojka, an Austrian Roma survivor. Looking around Europe and the world today, we could not agree more with her. Soon we will enter a time without survivors. The personal testimonies of Roma and Sinti and their decades-long efforts to shed light on the horrors they endured during the Holocaust reveal not only atrocities, but also the resilience and strength of our people. The history of the Roma people is part of European history and must be treated as such. Yet even now, the truth and the full dimension of the Roma genocide during the Holocaust remain insufficiently acknowledged, too often ignored. This is the forgotten genocide of the Roma people. As a young Roma, I make the following plea today. Continue to fight in your own country so that every history class, every child in Europe will learn about the Roma Holocaust and the centuries of discrimination and intolerance endured by Roma. Every year, on 2nd August, the Dicannabis Star Initiative gathers together hundreds of Roma and non-Roma young people in Auschwitz for Roma Holocaust Memorial Day. We want to ensure that the memory of the victims reaches the newest generations and creates an alliance for an inclusive future. Dear President Rosopoulos, in 2024, for the first time, you headed an important delegation of this assembly to pay tribute to the Roma victims. This was such a strong message for the young people present in Auschwitz. We rely on the Council of Europe to uphold its mandate, to continue advocating for proper education and research on history, and for social justice for Roma people across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Laboda. I will call now Mr. Tim Stefaniak on behalf of the LGBTI community. You can come to the rostrum as well. Thank you.
Dear Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly, dear Mr. Secretary General, dear Chief Rabbi Maya Lau, dear members of Parliament. Today, 80 years after the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, we remember one of the darkest chapters in German and European history. We remember all people and all social groups that were persecuted by the National Socialists. We also remember their courage, their resistance, and their solidarity. I would like to focus today on the persecution of queer, trans, and intersex people who were criminalized, denounced, imprisoned, tortured, and murdered. The pink triangle marks bisexual and gay men in concentration camps, as well as trans women who were seen as men by the regime and prosecuted under the paragraph 175. They commonly found themselves at the bottom of the camp hierarchy and received little solidarity from their fellow inmates. After the concentration camps were liberated, many of them remained in prison. It took a long struggle, both in Germany and in Europe, until their persecution and suffering were officially recognized. Their stories must be part of our collective memory in order to draw lessons from the past for our political present and future. In many parts of the world, queer people are still criminalized, and almost everywhere they continue to experience social discrimination, exclusion, and violence, including here in Europe. It is our shared responsibility to end such discrimination and to ensure that queer people have the same opportunities as all others, to live a life in freedom and safety. Especially in this dangerous moment when anti-democratic forces are gaining strength and finding their way into the democratic parliaments of Europe. Today and every day, let us not only remember but also act. Let us work tirelessly together for a Europe and a world in which no person is marginalized, persecuted because of their identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stefaniak. I call now Chief Rabbi of Israel, Meir Lau, Chairman of the Yad Vashem Council and survivor of the Holocaust, to take the floor. Chief Rabbi.
Minister of the Head and the President of the European Council, the Secretary of the European Council, members of the European Council from all over Europe, guests, leaders, and friends. I will start with something very, very personal. I was 6 years old when my father was killed in Treblinka, together with my brother, who was 13 years old only. My mother was with us till she died in Ravensbrück in Germany when she was 42, and I was 7.5 years old. So in this age of 7.5, I lost my father and my mother, a brother, and an older brother, 11 years older than me, saved my life for the rest 3 years that we stayed during the war, World War II, in Piotrków Trybunalski, then in Częstochowa in Poland, and lately in Buchenwald, Germany, where we were released by the American troops, General Rappen. When I was liberated in Buchenwald, I was younger than 8 years old. I was sure that this is the end of the world. My brother, at the end, was very sick, over 42 degrees. Before he separated me in Buchenwald, he didn't believe that he will exist, and he told me, Lulek was my Polish nickname, Lulek, they take me, and we will never meet again. To speak to you very open, you are adult enough to understand. I think that this is the end of all of us, Jewish people, and you are Jewish. You know that father was the rabbi of Piotrków. We are Jewish. I spoke only Polish that time. I don't believe that you will live, but in case, and a miracle may happen, and you will stay alive, everyone will want to take you with him. I had a good friend in Russia. I had a good friend in France. I had friends all over from Buchenwald, Jewish and non-Jewish survivors. Don't go with none of those. Never. Say to them kindly, thank you, but I'm not going with you. So I asked him, Tulek is Naphtali, where shall I go? Tell me, where shall I go? He said, there is one place for you, for us. Repeat the name of this place with me. Say it. Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. I looked at him, didn't understand. I didn't know one word in Hebrew. Say, repeat it. Eretz Israel. And if you will survive, remember this is your place, only there. Behind the course, I asked him, Tulek, but why Eretz Israel? He said, this is our homeland. He said, I was born in Poland, Piotrków Trybunalski. How is Eretz Israel my homeland? He said, this is the historic homeland, and this is the only place, how naive, that they don't kill the Jews. This is the place for you. The place where they don't kill Jews. Remember, you will go to Eretz Israel. By miracle, he disappeared. He overcame the disease, and we came to Eretz Israel before the establishment of the State of Israel. On 1945, we were the first newcomers to the land of Israel after World War II. Only boys, only children, only orphanages. And we came there. Less than 3 years later, the United Nations had decided to decide a Jewish state in a part of the historic land of Israel, the State of Israel. On November 1947, the Israeli state was established. We danced in the streets. I remember that night. I was about 10 years old. None was going to sleep. The whole Jewish population, over 500,000 at that time, we were dancing in the streets all the night. We have a land. We have a home. What means the home? Nobody will kill us anymore. No more concentration camps. No more ghettos. We are in our home. We're so happy. But in the same time, 47 and 48, 7 countries of our neighbors, a little bit further, Arab countries, disappeared. They disagree with this decision of the United Nations, and they fought us. This was our independence war, which took a year and a half. A year and a half, and the army was very poor. We didn't have one airplane that time, not even one helicopter, whatever. Some tanks and feet, heroes, some of them with numbers of the arms, survivors of the Holocaust, fighting for themselves and for the new appearance. 7 Arab countries fought against us. But lately, during the history, 2 very important of them, and the very close neighbors of us, made peace with us. Egypt and Jordan. Till this very last day, we have ambassadors in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, from all these countries, including Egypt and Egypt. And now we have with other people, Arab people, from Saudi, Bahrain, who made peace with us last years. Only last 10 years, 5 years, we have good relationship. I have a friend, German, what's his name? German Zakhariev. He told me about an Arab state. All the people there speak Arabic, and they are Islamics. Azerbaijan, not in the Middle East. Somewhere in Europe, Asian Europe. Azerbaijan, very close friends to Israel. They agree to our existence, to our independence, to our freedom. Azerbaijan, remember the name. Zacharias. But this is not the picture of the whole world. In the world of today, very many people forgot about the Holocaust. Doesn't know about World War II. They are not in this assembly now. They are denying the very future and existence of the Jewish people till this very last day. They call it anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism. Who would believe 80 years ago, I was day before yesterday in Auschwitz, when he spoke about 80 years of liberation of Auschwitz. No more war, no more bloodshed. That's what we meant, that's what we hoped. But today we speak about liquidation, about war, about bloodshed again. I must tell you one short remembrance that I have 40 years ago. Australia, the edge of the world for us in Europe. Australia. Melbourne, a very Jewish city, Melbourne. After Sydney comes Melbourne. I was there 40 years ago for a lecture. It was a Saturday, Shabbat. I went with a friend who followed me from one home to the hotel. It was almost midnight, Friday night. We stopped at the red light in the street, the two of us. I was dressed like here, like now, Jewish uniform of a rabbi. My friend almost the same. A car stopped. In the car, beautiful car, were sitting two young people, around the 40s. He stopped the car. He had a green light, but he stopped, looked at the two of us, and shouted out. I will never forget, 40 years ago. Jews! Did you pay the bill for the gas you used in the chambers? I looked at my friend. He was an Australian. Maybe my English is not good enough. Maybe I didn't understand. If we paid for the gas used in the chambers in Auschwitz, in Majdanek, in 6 places where the gas was used by the Nazis to liquidate the Jewish people, and we had to pay for the gas. And we didn't pay 40 years after the war. Did you pay the bill? I asked my friend, you are an Australian born here in Melbourne. Do you used to hear expressions like this? I said that Australia doesn't know about World War II. Edge of the world. He said, unfortunately, I hear words like this very often. Today, anti-Semitism goes up. You can speak about today underground movement speaking about liquidation of Israel, of the Jewish people. Believe me, I live in Israel almost 80 years. Just after the war, as I told you, the first new Olim to Israel after World War II. We never began a war. We never started to fight with any of our neighbors. Even the United Nations gave us in 1947 a very narrow, small country. Tel Aviv was divided, according to the UN, between Jaffa and Tel Aviv, Arab station and Jewish station. The only airport that time in Lydia wasn't in our hands, international. Jerusalem didn't belong to the Jewish people according to the United Nations 1947. Jerusalem was not ours. And in spite of that, we were happy. As I told you, we were dancing in the streets. And we never started the war. Not the independence war, not the 1940 and 19 5 wars. None of them was started by us. Believe me, we want peace. We will not pay for the bill of the gas chambers. We don't understand what means a human being, gas chambers. This is a human being's behavior. To kill innocent people, 1,200,000 children, younger than me at that time, were killed by the Nazis in the Holocaust and the partners. We never will start a war. We love peace. We love friendship. We love people. And we have the Bible. We have our history. We have our tradition of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, of Moses, King Solomon, and all the other leaders of the Jewish people during the history of 4,000 years existence of the Jewish people, in spite of all the exiles and all of the troubles. We love people. We love freedom. We love to love each other, to respect one the other. And that's why I'm so happy that you have invited me to say these warm words, what I feel in my heart. No peace in Europe and all over the world. We love mankind. We love people, and we want to grow up. We want that our children will know freedom, will know peace, and never a war, never again. Only peace, friendship, and love. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chief Rabbi. Thank you. Chief Rabbi has accepted my proposal to invite in our hemicycle 6 students from the secondary school who will address him asking a question each. We will listen first to the question and then Chief Rabbi will reply to all of them. So, I would like to ask you to listen to the questions of the children and then reply to all of them. I'll take all questions now and then you will have the time to reply. I'm asking now Ms. Rubin Asor to take the floor first. Madame Rubin Asor.
Can you tell us what's changed in your views with regard to humanity? Good morning. How have things changed in your view with regard to humanity and life in general?
And then we will go to Salsabil Pensaki.
Hello. Can you tell me what the event is that marked you the most during your deportation?
Zuhir Damani is next.
Hello. Could you tell us how your liberation from the camp of Buchenwald occurred?
Hoang Phuong Tao Hyun. I hope I pronounced it in the most appropriate way.
Hello. Are there memories that you have never talked about?
Thank you. Yvette Quadwo.
Hello. Was it possible to make friends in the camp?
Thank you. And now we have Linda van Hammer Bendu.
Hello. What was the most difficult thing for you when you came back to a normal life afterwards?
Thank the students for being with us. Chief Rabbi, would you like to respond to the children? Yes.
Thank you for the questions. I'm not sure that I got all of them, and I will try to answer some of them at least in a short time, right? President,
Yes,
we are short in time,
yeah.
very short in time.
We have 5 minutes.
I will try with the last one was, how was it to get friends in the Holocaust? Yeah. I was adopted already in Buchenwald by a Russian young man, also in the camp, Fyodor of Rostov. He cooked potatoes every day for me, not myself. He made a cover of wool on my ears, and frozen in the morning, not to leave, not to let them. He was older than me with 10 years. He was a Russian, I was a Jewish. He knew that I'm Jew. He saved my life, and he endangered himself for me. I met his daughters and his son, and he himself passed away already, is mentioned in Yad Vashem, in the Mount of Yad Vashem, as one of the of the righteous of the world. So we could find friends in the world.
So, Chief
I was
Rabbi,
asked what was...
if you want, I can help by repeating the questions one by one, if it helps you.
What?
Would you like me to repeat the questions one by one?
The question? Ma? No, not all the questions, no. Huh? I was asked what was the most
striking event during your deportation.
The most hard moment during the war. Yes. One moment that I will never forget is, I think this is the most. Not where I saw killing people, children, women, elderlies. We are used to see it. But one moment and one move I will never forget. When the Russian came close to Poland, to Piotrków, where I was born, the German pushed us to the train to take us out away from the city, not to be free. We didn't know where they take us. I went with my mother. I was 7.5. And my brother was 18 already. And there were two groups in the train station. They divided us into two troops, men, women. And I went with my mother, the women. My mother was very smart. She understood if the Nazis find time to make two parties, we are not going to the same direction. The same train, but not in the same wagon. And the ladies were pushed first. Ladies with babies. And the men, not yet. She pushed me to my brother. She understood that the men had more chance to exist, to survive, because they are workers, not ladies and not babies. So in order to save my life, he separated me from her. She pushed me away to my brother, crying to him, Tulek, Naftali, take the child, take the jetsko, take the child. She was pushed with the ladies to the wagon. I was crying out, Mama, I want to go with you, Mama. And the only thing that I saw from her was with the hand. To my brother and to myself, this was the last move that I saw, the last moment we met her in our lives. Only much later, after the war, we were told that she was killed in Ravensbrück, in this German city, in the camp, with the ladies, and we didn't see her anymore. This was this move with the hand, and unforgettable for me, more than all the 6 years of the war. This is for your question. I think that this will be enough. We will let you go.
Chief Rabbi, dear participants, guests, and dear colleagues, I want to thank you all for participating in this commemoration of the 80th anniversary. I will now invite you to join me at the front of the Palais de l'Europe for a continuation of the ceremony. The Assembly we will have there to lay a wreath and a minute of silence, and the Assembly will hold its next public sitting at this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with the agenda approved on Monday. The sitting is adjourned.